After a night with his lover, billionaire Oliver Whitman returned home, only to find his pregnant wife, Clara Whitman, waiting with divorce papers. Clara never imagined she'd be signing away her marriage while carrying the child of the man she once believed was her forever. Yet here she was, documents clutched in trembling hands, bracing for his arrival. After a night of lavish excess with another woman, Oliver Whitman, a self-made tycoon admired among San Francisco's high society, had always walked the razor's edge between ruthless ambition and reckless temptation. As rain clouds gathered over the Bay Bridge just before dawn, Clara's heartbeat thundered with a grim finality. Every fairy tale illusion of their marriage lay shattered at her feet. The moment she uncovered his betrayal, everything changed. What came next would be a story of heartbreak, bitter revelations, and a woman's fight to reclaim her dignity. Clara Benson had pictured a storybook life ever since she was a teenager in a quiet coastal town near Monterey, California. Her upbringing was simple: neighborhood barbecues, church fundraisers, and lazy Sunday strolls along the fishing docks. But underneath that simple charm burned a fierce ambition. She won a scholarship to a prestigious university on the West Coast and moved to bustling San Francisco. It was at a black-tie charity auction during her junior year when she first met Oliver Whitman. Back then, Oliver was an up-and-coming businessman, hungry to carve out his place in the city's fiercely competitive tech market. Clara, volunteering for the scholarship committee, wasn't part of the city's elite crowd, but Oliver saw something different in her. He approached her with a suave ease that felt effortless. She was drawn in by his charisma, his easy laughter, quick mind, and the way he owned any room he stepped into. They started dating soon after. That first year was a rush of candlelit dinners, long midnight drives along Highway 1, and spontaneous getaways to Napa Valley. By the time Oliver landed his first big tech contract, a multi-million-dollar deal, Clara stood by him, loyal and steady. She brought a calming balance to his relentless drive. But even in those early days, there were signs she chose to ignore. Oliver craved the spotlight and thrived on constant praise. He chased wealthy investors with tireless energy, attending extravagant parties that often didn't wind down until sunrise. He always insisted it was part of closing deals, and Clara accepted that at face value. She wanted so badly to believe that her husband's appetite for success was just an innocent trait of an ambitious man. If he sometimes turned vague or slipped into bed reeking of a high-end perfume that wasn't hers, she told herself it was the unavoidable price of networking in the tech world. They married in a lavish ceremony at the Fairmont Hotel, a wedding that landed in the glossy pages of local lifestyle magazines. Clara radiant in a custom gown, Oliver beaming with conquering pride. Their honeymoon in Santorini seemed to seal a promise of lifelong happiness. But once they returned home, the cracks widened. Oliver's work hours grew more unpredictable, and the secretive phone calls he claimed were sensitive negotiations became more frequent. At galas and fundraisers, whispers floated through the air, hints of his rumored affairs. Every time Clara gathered the courage to ask gentle questions, Oliver deflected with half-truths and a condescending pat on her head. Now, sitting alone in their penthouse apartment, pregnant and hollowed out by suspicion, Clara saw all those quiet warning bells she'd ignored turning into a deafening alarm. Tonight, she would face the truth and his betrayal head-on. Their penthouse in downtown San Francisco was living proof of Oliver's remarkable rise. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a sweeping view from the glittering Bay Bridge lights to the distant sparkle of the Golden Gate. But tonight, that stunning skyline only deepened Clara's sense of loneliness. Outside, the city pulsed on without pause, while her world felt frozen in place, suspended in dread. Clara sat curled on a velvet chaise, absently tapping her fingers against the curve of her belly. She was 5 months along, and each tiny movement inside her reminded her that every choice she made now would shape another innocent life. Oliver still hadn't come home. The wall clock ticked closer to midnight. "Do you think he's okay?" her friend Natalie Park had asked earlier on the phone. Natalie, who had been her rock since high school, the safekeeper of every secret. Or is he just, out again? Clara forced a thin, brittle laugh. "He's fine. Probably tangled up in some meeting, or at least that's what he'll say." But Natalie's question had scraped at Clara's worst fear. That Oliver wasn't with a client at all, that the rumors she'd dismissed for years were heartbreakingly real. As the night dragged on, old doubts clawed back to the surface. She thought of the time, just 2 months ago, when he'd stumbled in from a so-called business dinner at 3 in the morning, drenched in a perfume she'd never owned. When she confronted him, he'd brushed her off with that same icy charm. "This is how deals happen, Clara. Don't be paranoid." Her phone buzzed, yanking her from the memory. She wished it was Oliver, but the screen lit up with a message from her friend Emily Chen instead. The text was short but cut deep, rumors swirling at a high-end lounge called Ember. Oliver seen with a new woman. Not a client. Be careful. Clara's hand trembled. Emily was never one to spread gossip. She hated drama. If she bothered to send that warning, it meant she genuinely feared for Clara's heart. A hot, sick feeling curled in Clara's stomach. She stared at the text until the letters blurred, replaying every excuse he'd fed her over the past weeks. The hours he claimed to work late. The scent of perfume she didn't own. The way he flinched when she asked simple questions. Each memory clicked into place like cruel puzzle pieces she'd refused to see. The baby kicked inside her, a tiny push against her ribs that made her eyes sting with tears. This has to stop, she thought, a quiet storm of resolve rising in her chest. My child deserves better, and so do I. She pressed a trembling hand to her belly, whispering softly, "I'm sorry, little one. I should have been stronger sooner." The apology caught in her throat, but it steeled her spine. She pushed herself up slowly, crossing the penthouse's gleaming hardwood floors toward the master bedroom. Inside her walk-in closet, behind rows of silk blouses and designer handbags, waited a manila envelope she'd had her lawyer prepare days ago. Divorce papers. Everything done except her final signature. She'd prayed she wouldn't have to use them. But alone tonight, anxiety tightening every breath, she finally faced the truth. Her husband's loyalty lay elsewhere. By sunrise, she would no longer be the obedient wife waiting up at home. At exactly 3:17 a.m., Oliver Whitman stepped off the private elevator and into the soft glow of their penthouse foyer. The chandelier overhead threw fractured patterns across the polished floor. His head throbbed, a few too many glasses of vintage champagne. He tugged at his tailored navy blazer, trying to hide the faint trace of expensive jasmine perfume clinging to his collar, an unfamiliar scent that didn't belong to Clara. He slipped off his shoes to keep quiet, only to see her silhouette in the dimness near the grand piano. He froze, the practiced confidence he wore like armor cracking for an instant. "Clara, why are you still awake?" he asked, fighting to keep his tone smooth. She didn't answer immediately. In the muted light, Oliver took in the weariness drawn across her face, the way her hands curled protectively around her belly. It struck him hard. She was carrying his child, the baby he'd claimed to want so much, even while he lost himself with another woman. "I couldn't sleep," she said at last, her voice sharp, stripped of its usual warmth. "I was worried about you." The words dropped between them, cold and edged. She stood there in her robe and slippers, but her stiff posture left no doubt. She was ready for battle. Oliver forced a reassuring grin, the same one he used to win over stubborn investors. "I told you, darling. Business runs late. You didn't have to wait up." He stepped closer, but the frustration and quiet devastation in her eyes held him back. "Who is she?" The question cracked through the silence like a whip. A flicker of panic crossed Oliver's face. "What are you talking about? I was in a meeting." She shook her head slowly, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. Glistening tears clung to her lashes. "Don't lie to me. I can smell her perfume. I can see the lipstick on your collar." She motioned toward his shirt, her voice shaking with restrained fury. The rumors, the gossip, the unexplained late nights, everything pointed to the same truth. Oliver opened his mouth, ready to spin another lie, but one glance at Clara's tear-filled, unyielding stare made the words die in his throat. The memory of his fling at Ember Lounge flashed through his mind, champagne flutes clinking, whispered promises he never meant to keep, fleeting kisses in the dark. There was no escaping it now. His silence said it all. Clara pressed her lips tight, shoulders rigid. "We're done, Oliver." Her voice cracked with emotion, despite her resolve. "I've had enough." She turned away, moving toward the kitchen island, where a folder waited under the pendant light. His chest tightened when he recognized the crisp legal stationery. Part of him had known this day would come, but never so suddenly, never with no chance to twist things back in his favor. She held the divorce papers out to him, her hand trembling but firm. Oliver understood then that tonight's betrayal wasn't just another slip. It was the moment that would tear down everything he and Clara had built, everything they'd once believed was unbreakable. He stared at the manila folder, the neat print glaring up at him like a verdict he couldn't appeal. Clara set it down on the polished marble counter and flipped the cover open, the harsh legal words stark under the warm kitchen lights. Complaint for divorce. He swallowed hard, voice rough. Clara, wait, let's talk. We can fix this. Don't do something you'll regret. Her face, etched with grief, offered him no escape. Regret? She let out a humorless laugh, the sound brittle. I've swallowed your lies for months, maybe years. I always gave you the benefit of the doubt, Oliver, over and over again. Her eyes dropped to the swell of her belly. A flash of pain crossed her face. We're about to bring a baby into this world. A baby who deserves parents who respect each other. A wave of shame crushed him. How many times had he stood on stage, preaching about hard work and integrity, the self-made boy from a rundown neighborhood in Oakland who clawed his way up to the penthouse skyline of San Francisco? He'd forgotten the values that once kept him honest. He reached out, desperate, but she shrank back instinctively, a silent wall rising between them. We can do counseling, he begged, voice cracking. Dr. Naomi Ellis, your friend mentioned her. She's good. She saved couples before. Clara's soft, bitter laugh cut him off like a knife. It's too late, Oliver. You think I haven't asked for this before? Or begged you? Clara's voice shook. How many times did I ask you to tell me the truth, what those late-night meetings were really about? You brushed me off every time. Oliver's mouth went dry. He remembered all the nights Clara had quietly pleaded with him to slow down, to skip the after-parties, to stay home with her instead of chasing Silicon Valley's glittering elite. He'd watched her stand by, patient and loving, as he sank deeper into a haze of champagne, adoration, and half-kept promises, each lie stacking up until it finally crushed everything between them. Her eyes shone with hurt. I can't let our child grow up in a house full of lies and betrayal and suspicion. Her voice cracked on the last word, and for a heartbeat, her shoulders quivered as if holding back a sob. She steadied herself, blinking furiously until no tears fell. Her hands trembled as she flipped through the divorce packet, pausing at the sections that divided their assets, laid out custody once the baby arrived, and listed the grounds for ending their marriage. Sign it, or don't. I don't care. I'm filing either way. Oliver's mind spun. He pictured the headlines, the business chaos, the humiliation of a very public scandal, but none of it weighed more than the gut-punch truth staring him down. The woman he had promised forever to was truly ready to walk away, and he couldn't pretend he hadn't earned it. He squeezed his fists at his sides, fighting the urge to beg, to drop to his knees and promise her the world, knowing deep down how hollow that promise would sound now. Clara stepped back, putting space between them in the wide, open living room. She sucked in a shaky breath, trying to steady her trembling hands. She had imagined this confrontation 1,000 times, scripted every word she would say. But standing here, face to face with the wreckage of her marriage, nothing could dull the raw pain cutting through her. Rooted by the marble counter, Oliver, once the unstoppable CEO who closed deals no one else could touch, felt utterly powerless. He tried to speak, but his throat locked up. Then his phone lit up on the coffee table, buzzing with notifications. The name flashing on the screen said it all, likely from the same woman he'd spent the night with at Ember. Clara's eyes followed the glow, her expression twisting with fresh disgust. That flicker of light was proof enough. Another slap in the face she didn't need words to confirm. She bit back tears. Do you get it? Her voice rose, thick with rage. Do you even understand what you're doing to me? To us? I am pregnant with your child, Oliver. Her eyes begged for some shred of reason, any words that might dull the agony. His shoulders slumped as he stepped closer, defeated. I know, he rasped. I know. I was stupid, Clara. I let it all spiral. Work, the parties, the spotlight. I forgot what mattered. You, us, our baby. She let out a hollow laugh and crossed her arms tightly over her chest. Now you realize that? Clara's voice trembled as the city lights beyond the windows blinked back at them, cruel and indifferent. It was as if San Francisco itself stood witness to how easily he'd let it all slip away. All those nights I stayed up waiting, all those times I begged you to just tell me the truth, and you think admitting it now makes it better? Oliver moved closer, the glint of a tear betraying him. I've destroyed our marriage, he said, his voice raw. I know it, and I hate myself for it. But if there's any chance, anything I can do, just tell me, Clara, please. Her chest tightened painfully, tears burning behind her eyes. Some fragile, foolish part of her wanted to collapse into his arms, to pretend none of it had happened. But she'd learned her lesson. More than once. Slowly, she forced herself back into control. I don't have any illusions left, Oliver. We're done. He seemed to cave in on himself, shoulders dropping, eyes hollow. The air between them thickened with the suffocating finality of it all. Around them, the penthouse's modern artwork, sleek furniture, and glittering skyline offered no comfort, just silent judgment. Without a word, Clara reached out and shut the folder. She took a breath, steadying her voice with sheer will. Tomorrow, she would hand these papers to her attorney, sign them for good, and step into a future without Oliver Whitman in it. And for all his pleading, deep down Oliver knew there was no rewinding from this ledge he'd pushed them onto. Sleep never came for Clara that night. By 5 a.m. she gave up pretending, standing by the vast windows as the first pale light crept across the bay. The dawn washed the sky in hushed pinks and dusky oranges, a quiet reminder that life, uncaring and unstoppable, moved on. She cupped her belly in both hands, whispering soft promises to the child she carried, though her own heart splintered with every word. She swore that her baby would never carry the weight of her sadness. Oliver had retreated to the guest room hours ago, but she knew he hadn't slept either. She could feel him there, an invisible pull at the edges of her mind she wanted so badly to silence. She drifted through the still living room, eyeing the marble hall that led back to him, and to everything she was leaving behind. The divorce folder in her bag seemed to grow heavier with every step. By mid-morning, she'd booked a car to take her across the city to Pacific Heights, where her oldest friend Natalie Park lived in a small but warm apartment. The moment Natalie opened the door and saw Clara's tear-streaked face, she pulled her in without hesitation, wrapping her in arms that smelled faintly of coffee and fresh laundry. "Oh, Clara," Natalie whispered, steering her toward the comfort of the living room. Natalie's apartment felt like another universe compared to Clara's cold, cavernous penthouse. Smaller, a little cluttered, alive with snapshots from old road trips and piles of dog-eared books. Yet the cozy mess radiated a warmth that Clara hadn't felt in her own home in far too long. She sank into the deep cushions of Natalie's couch and let out a shaky breath. "I couldn't stay there anymore," she whispered, her voice cracking as fresh tears pricked her eyes. "I filed for divorce, or I will. Everything's ready." Natalie's eyes widened, but her grip on Clara's hand was steady and reassuring. "Finally," she murmured, giving Clara's fingers a gentle squeeze. "It hurts like hell, but you've been hurting alone for way too long. You, and that baby, deserve so much better." One tear escaped and traced down Clara's cheek. "I wanted to believe he'd change, that we could fix it. But every time I gave him another chance, he used it to break my trust all over again." Her shoulders hunched as if to protect herself from the memories. She could still picture him, Oliver, laughing at another investor's joke while she sat alone at a gala table, the half-empty wine glass in front of her untouched. Each moment she forgave him had chipped away at pieces of herself she couldn't get back. Natalie nodded, her look soft but knowing. She had seen it all unfold. Oliver's endless excuses, the empty reassurances, the hollow promises that Clara had clung to like lifelines. "So, what now?" Natalie asked quietly. Clara let out a tired sigh, one hand resting protectively on her belly. "First, I protect my child. I'll stay here for a few days, if that's okay, just until I can figure out what comes next." "You don't even have to ask," Natalie said instantly. "Stay as long as you need to. And Clara, have you talked to your lawyer about custody? Child support? Oliver's going to try to spin this in his favor if he can." Clara winced. She knew better than anyone how easily Oliver's wealth and charisma tipped things his way in a courtroom. "I will. I won't let him dodge his responsibility." But, her voice cracked, I hate that my baby has to come into a broken family. I hate that so much. Natalie pressed a comforting hand to her back. Clara sank deeper into the couch cushions, feeling a bittersweet surge of gratitude for this safe corner in the storm. She had done the hardest part. She'd taken the first step toward freedom, no matter how terrifying the next steps might be. Not even a day later, Clara stood in the sleek glass and marble lobby of Holloway & Chen, one of the Bay Area's top family law firms. The glossy floors, the modern decor, everything about the place screamed the same quiet power Oliver's penthouse once did. Her pulse hammered as she stepped up to the receptionist, the manila folder hugged tight to her chest. A polite assistant led her to a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bustling street below. There, she met her lawyer, Andrea Chen, a composed woman in her early 40s with a reputation for razor-sharp negotiations and zero tolerance for nonsense. Andrea greeted her with a warm, steady voice and motioned for Clara to sit. Clara. Andrea began gently but firmly. I'm truly sorry you're going through this. I've gone through the preliminary paperwork you sent over. Given your husband's assets, we can petition for significant spousal and child support. Clara nodded, swallowing against the lump in her throat. I understand. I'm not trying to ruin him, Clara said softly, her fingers tightening around the folder in her lap. But he's shown he can't be trusted. Especially with money. I have to make sure this baby will be provided for, no matter what happens. Andrea Chen leaned forward, hands folded on her tidy glass desk. I completely agree. The next step is to file the formal petition for divorce with the court. We'll include Oliver's infidelity as grounds and add any supporting evidence you have. Do you have documents, witness statements, text messages, anything concrete? It'll help strengthen your case if he tries to dispute it. Clara's mind flashed to the late-night screenshots and blurry photos her friends, like Emily Chen, had sent her, proving what Oliver had been up to behind her back. She hated the idea of putting her private pain on display, but pride had to yield to reality. A fresh wave of shame and anger twisted in her gut. Every photo felt like a slap, proof she'd been the last to admit what everyone else saw so clearly. She could almost hear Oliver's voice, suave and dismissive, calling her paranoid when she'd asked simple questions. I have a trail, she admitted quietly. I never wanted to use it, but here we are. Andrea gave a sympathetic nod. Good. I'll need access to all financial records, bank accounts, property deeds, your medical documents for the pregnancy, anything that shows the financial picture clearly. And are you staying with Natalie for now? Clara brushed away a tear with the back of her hand. Yes, at least for a little while. I can't go back to that penthouse. I just can't face him again. Andrea's tone softened. I understand. But keep in mind, unless a judge says otherwise, Oliver technically has the right to stay in the marital home. Emotional distance alone isn't enough in the eyes of the law. A tightness coiled in Clara's chest. The legal weight of all this was heavier than she'd let herself imagine. She pictured herself climbing into bed alone every night while Oliver threw parties, made deals, lived untouched by her sleepless hours and silent prayers. Not anymore. So what should I do first? File for temporary spousal support and exclusive use of the penthouse, Andrea said firmly. We can argue that you're pregnant and need a stable environment. Courts usually consider that seriously. Clara let out a long breath, her knuckles white around the manila folder. Okay, she said at last, her voice steadier than she felt. Let's do it. She signed the retainer agreement and handed over the official divorce paperwork. A shaky mix of relief and dread washed through her. She was stepping onto a battlefield, armed now with a fierce attorney and her own hard-won resolve. Next came Oliver himself, and the fight that would unfold once he realized she wasn't backing down this time. Meanwhile, back in the penthouse, Oliver was trapped in a cycle of regret and self-loathing. He paced the glossy floors like a caged animal, shooting furious glances at the phone that had exposed his secret life to Clara. Every sound in the vast apartment felt magnified. The low hum of the central air, the faint rumble of traffic far below. By midday, he knew he couldn't outrun this any longer. He had to call his own lawyer. Atticus Holloway, co-founder of the same law firm Clara had visited, but a man Oliver had known for years through real estate and corporate dealings, stood by the tall windows of his high-rise office, staring out at the shifting San Francisco skyline when his phone buzzed. "Oliver," Atticus answered, a faint edge of concern in his tone. "I've heard you're having some personal trouble. How can I help?" Oliver swallowed hard, the words catching in his throat. "I need the best defense you can build in a divorce," he confessed tightly. "Clara's pregnant, and she's leaving me. I screwed up, Atticus, but I can't lose everything." Atticus fell silent for a beat, clearly weighing the fallout. "Is there any chance you can fix this outside of court? Mediation, maybe?" Oliver shut his eyes, a vision of Clara's devastated face flashing behind his lids, how he'd carved betrayal into a marriage that once meant everything. "I'd like to, but she handed me divorce papers. She's with Chen's firm. They won't back down on support or custody." Atticus exhaled, resigned. "Then we prepare for the worst and hope for the best. First, we need a full picture of your assets, properties, accounts, stocks. We can't give them any reason to paint you as someone hiding money or planning to disappear. That'll kill your credibility with the judge." Oliver dragged a hand through his hair, remembering all the times he'd bragged about having everything perfectly organized. Now that order felt like a fragile facade, ready to collapse. "I'll send you everything," he promised. Atticus's tone stayed level but firm. "And be ready. If there's proof of infidelity, that can sway decisions about alimony and custody. Show them you're repentant and ready to be a real father. It's your best chance." A sharp ache cut through Oliver's chest at that word. Father. He hadn't even been at Clara's last ultrasound. He'd been at Ember, drinking with a woman whose name barely registered now. He clenched his jaw. "I'll do whatever it takes," he said hoarsely. "I can't let her believe I won't change." When the call ended, the quiet of the penthouse pressed in heavier than ever, like the walls themselves were ashamed of him. Guilt gnawed at him as he picked up his phone and stared at Clara's contact photo, a snapshot of her laughing on some windswept Pacific beach. With trembling fingers, he typed, "I'm so sorry. I'm here. Please, let me be part of our baby's life." He hit send, knowing an apology alone couldn't rebuild what he'd torn apart. Miles away, Clara sat at Natalie's kitchen table, cradling a mug of lukewarm tea, when her phone buzzed with Oliver's message, full of regret and desperate promises. Her chest tightened. Anger, sadness, and a confusing flicker of old sympathy tangled inside her like a knot she couldn't cut free. She set the phone down on the table, screen face down, choosing not to reply. From the stove, where she was stirring a pot of oatmeal for breakfast, Natalie glanced over. "He's not giving up, is he?" she asked gently. Clara shook her head. "He says he's sorry, that he wants to be involved, but I don't know if I can trust that anymore. I'm just so tired, Natalie." Natalie stepped away from the stove and wrapped her arms around Clara's shoulders, pulling her into the warmth of a quiet, steady hug. "It's okay to feel that way. You've been carrying this weight by yourself for too long." Clara closed her eyes and pressed her hand over her belly, marveling at how pregnancy awakened a fierce protectiveness she'd never known she had. Every tiny flutter reminded her that this wasn't just about her anymore. She was fighting for someone who couldn't fight for themselves yet, and every decision mattered. She let out a long sigh. "Andrea says the next step is to finalize everything and have Oliver served officially. She also said if he gets pushy or tries to corner me, I should think about a restraining order." Natalie frowned. "You really think he'd go that far?" Clara hesitated, her mind drifting back to the handful of times Oliver's anger had flared during tense business negotiations. He'd never laid a hand on her, but she wasn't naive about how desperation could twist even the most polished people. "I hope not," she said quietly. "But I've seen what he's like when he feels backed into a corner. This might be the same." The two friends sat in silence for a moment, the everyday sounds of the city drifting through the open kitchen window. Distant horns, tires hissing through wet streets, bits of conversation rising and fading. The world spun on, oblivious to the hurricane in Clara's chest. "Have you told your mom yet?" Natalie asked softly. Clara's throat tightened. "No, not yet. She adores Oliver. She brags about him to everyone back home, still talks about how lucky I was to find my prince. I can't stand the thought of breaking her heart." Natalie gave a small, sad smile. Better she hear it from you than find out some other way. She'd want to be here for you, Clara. Clara nodded, bracing herself. She would need her mother's gentle support, now more than ever, to weather the legal fight ahead. But for today she focused on keeping her mind clear and her strength steady. She finished the last of her tea, mentally practicing how to stay calm when the real storm of paperwork, court dates, and negotiations came crashing in. Above all else, she promised herself, she would never compromise her child's safety and future, no matter how many times Oliver said he was sorry. 2 days later, San Francisco's famously unpredictable weather unleashed a sudden downpour, turning sidewalks into fast-running streams. Clara, determined not to miss her scheduled prenatal appointment at Bayview Medical Center, braved the storm beneath a sturdy black umbrella. A ripple of anxiety passed through her. Oliver had always come to these checkups, at least in the beginning. But he wasn't here now. He wasn't her choice anymore. She pulled in a deep breath and reminded herself that she was strong enough to do this alone. Inside, the bright fluorescent lights and the soft murmur of patients at check-in offered a fragile sense of normalcy. Clara gave her name at the reception desk and sank into a waiting room chair, ignoring the curious glances of strangers, some of whom probably recognized her face from glossy lifestyle articles that once celebrated her perfect marriage. The Whitmans' marriage had been as high profile as it was enviable, and gossip columns buzzed non-stop about the trouble brewing behind their glamorous facade. A few minutes slipped by in the waiting room before a nurse finally called her name, mispronouncing it slightly in her rush. Ms. Whitman? Clara stood, feeling self-conscious about the name she might not legally carry much longer. She settled into the exam room, her hands folded tightly over her belly as she waited for Dr. Naomi Ellis to arrive. Dr. Ellis was a kind, seasoned obstetrician who had guided countless couples through pregnancy. She had become a steady presence in Clara's life these past few months. When the door finally opened, Clara's stomach twisted. Oliver stepped in right behind Dr. Ellis. The doctor offered an apologetic smile. "I'm sorry for the surprise," Dr. Ellis said gently. "Mr. Whitman insisted on being here today. He said you might have forgotten to let him know." Clara's mind raced. She swallowed down the shock, reminding herself not to lose her composure. Oliver stood there, rain-soaked, his hair dripping slightly, eyes locked on hers with a desperate plea. "I just wanted to be sure everything's okay with the baby," he said quietly. "Please, let me stay. I won't cause a scene, I promise." A rush of conflicting feelings crashed over her. Part of her seethed at his nerve, showing up uninvited after she'd begun untangling herself from him. But another part, the part that remembered how excited he'd been at their very first ultrasound, softened just a fraction. She hated that part of herself, the sliver of her heart that still wanted to believe him, to rewind time and pretend none of this had happened. It flickered like a stubborn flame she kept trying to stamp out. She flicked her eyes to Dr. Ellis, needing guidance. "It's entirely up to you," Dr. Ellis said kindly. "If you'd rather he step out, just say so." Clara's pulse hammered in her ears. She forced herself to nod. "He can stay," she murmured, her voice tight. Oliver sank into a chair near the exam table, hands clasped awkwardly, uncharacteristically silent. Dr. Ellis moved through the usual checks, measuring her belly, taking her blood pressure, asking gentle questions about any aches or concerns. The entire time, Oliver's eyes stayed fixed either on Clara's face or on the flickering monitor. When the steady whooshing of their baby's heartbeat filled the room, Clara felt tears sting her eyes. She caught Oliver blinking hard too, an echo of the joy he might have felt if not for everything shattered between them. For a heartbeat, she let herself feel that lost future. Him by her side at every checkup, cooing over ultrasound photos, promising bedtime stories and first steps. But the vision dissolved just as quickly, replaced by the jagged memory of whispered lies. But as soon as the exam ended and Dr. Ellis stepped out to finish her notes, Clara felt her resolve settle back into place like armor. She pulled her coat tighter around herself, bracing to get out of there as fast as possible. Oliver had invaded her last safe space, and no matter how sincere his regret looked on his face, Clara refused to let him hijack her choices again. As soon as Dr. Ellis left the room, Clara slid off the exam table, ready to bolt before Oliver could corner her. but he moved first, stepping just in front of the door. Not aggressively, but just enough to show he had something to say that he wouldn't swallow back this time. "Thank you for letting me be here," he said, his voice low, careful not to draw attention from the busy hallway beyond. "I know you didn't have to do that." Clara kept her eyes anywhere but on him, her hands fumbling with her coat zipper as the tension in the small room thickened. "Don't read into it," she said flatly. "I just didn't want to cause a scene in a hospital." He nodded, the sorrow crossing his face painfully real this time. "I get it, but I need you to know something, Clara." He paused, as if dragging the words up from somewhere raw. "I'm not fighting you because I want to make this ugly. I'm fighting because I can't picture my life without you, or our baby." A hot bolt of anger cut through the ache she'd managed to bury. "You couldn't imagine your life without us?" Her voice cracked with disbelief. "Then why did you risk everything for some fling, however many nights it really was?" He flinched, remembering too clearly the reckless mistake that had turned into a milestone of ruin. "I was weak. I let myself get swept up in the thrill, the ego boost. God, I know how pathetic that sounds. But I never stopped loving you." She laid a protective hand over her belly, pulling strength from the steady heartbeat growing inside her. "You have a twisted way of showing love, Oliver." Her voice shook as she wiped away the tears brimming in her eyes. "Stop pretending you can patch this up with a sorry and one surprise doctor's visit. I've already filed for divorce. You'll get the papers soon." Oliver's shoulders slumped, his hand dragging through his damp hair, every breath ragged. "What if? Just listen. What if we tried counseling? I'll do it this time. I'll cut back my hours, shut out the toxic crowd, all of it. I swear, Clara." But her mind flashed through all the nights spent alone, waiting in bed for a husband who never came home before dawn, the calls that went straight to voicemail, the excuses whispered half awake the next morning. And every time, she'd told herself he'd change once the baby arrived. Not anymore. She tugged her coat tighter around her shoulders, bracing herself to leave as fast as she could. Oliver had barged into her safe space today, and no matter how sincere his apologies seemed in the moment, Clara refused to let him drag her backward again. As soon as Dr. Ellis stepped out, Clara slipped off the exam table and headed for the door. But Oliver moved first, blocking her path. Not forcefully, just enough to make it clear he needed to speak. "Thank you for letting me stay," he said, voice low so no one in the hallway could overhear. "I know you didn't have to." Clara avoided his eyes, focusing instead on zipping up her coat with trembling hands. The knot in her chest tightened. "Don't read into it. I wasn't about to cause a scene in a hospital," she said flatly. He nodded, sorrow flickering across his features. "I get it, but I need you to hear me, Clara. I'm not fighting you to punish you. I'm fighting for us, because I can't picture my life without you and our baby." A fresh wave of anger scorched through her, drowning out the tiny ache in her heart. "You couldn't imagine your life without us?" She shot back, her voice shaking. "Then why risk everything for a cheap thrill with someone else? Or however many someones there were?" He flinched, shame dragging at his features. He thought back to the reckless fling that had cost him more than he ever imagined. "I was stupid, weak. I let my ego get in the way. But I never stopped loving you." Clara pressed a protective hand over her belly, grounding herself in the quiet strength of the child growing inside her. "You have a twisted idea of love, Oliver," she said, blinking back tears that burned at the corners of her eyes. "Let's stop pretending you can fix this with an apology and one surprise doctor's visit. I've already filed for divorce. You'll get the papers soon enough." Oliver's face fell. He ran a hand through his damp hair, his breath catching on his next words. "What if? Just hear me out. What if we tried counseling? I'll do it this time. I'll cut my hours, drop the late nights, everything. I swear to you, Clara." But her mind flashed through too many nights spent alone in their bed, her calls going straight to voicemail, his half-hearted excuses the next morning. She'd consoled herself for years with the lie that fatherhood would magically change him. She knew better now. She pleaded, "Let's figure this out together." Clara promised her mother she'd think about it, though deep down, she dreaded the idea of leaving the city she'd worked so hard to build her life in. After hanging up, Clara slid down the wall until she was sitting on the floor, tears streaming freely. The weight of her mother's heartbreak, the endless legal decisions ahead, and the uncertainty clouding her baby's future pressed heavy on her chest. Natalie knelt beside her, laying a steady hand on Clara's shoulder. "Storms don't last forever," she murmured. "You're doing the right thing, even if it hurts like hell." Outside, thunder rumbled, echoing the chaos churning inside her heart. But beneath the sorrow, Clara clung fiercely to one simple truth. She was free now, free to rebuild a life without betrayal, without fear. 2 weeks later, while San Francisco's pulse thudded on like nothing had changed, everything had changed for Clara. She was still living at Natalie's cozy apartment, piecing together a fragile new routine: short morning walks to ease her pregnancy aches, afternoons going over case files with Andrea Chen, and quiet evenings curled on the couch, her thoughts drifting from anxiety to cautious hope for what lay ahead. Andrea had arranged a mediation session, one final attempt to settle things out of court before the divorce could be finalized. Both sides, both lawyers, and one room, a chance maybe to close this chapter faster. Clara's emotions tangled inside her. Part of her dreaded seeing Oliver's face again. Another part prayed this would speed up her freedom. On the morning of mediation, she stood before the mirror in Natalie's guest room, smoothing down a simple navy maternity dress that felt equal parts soft armor and quiet strength. She rested a hand on her belly. The baby nudged back, a gentle push that steadied her. "We've got this," she whispered. At the mediator's office, a sleek, modern suite high up in a glass tower downtown, Clara arrived with Andrea by her side. An assistant led them into a bright conference room where sunlight spilled over a long glass table surrounded by leather chairs. Outside, the city thrummed on, indifferent to the war being fought in here. Oliver was already at the far end of the table, Atticus Holloway seated beside him. He rose when Clara walked in, eyes flickering with a pleading mix of regret and fragile hope. She didn't look at him. She only set her purse carefully on the chair, her focus fixed on the end goal: freedom. The mediator, a seasoned professional named Daphne Morales, began the session by laying out the ground rules: respect, honesty, and a genuine willingness to negotiate. Her calm, steady voice softened the tension in the room, if only slightly. Andrea spoke first, clearly stating Clara's grounds for divorce: infidelity, emotional neglect, and the need for solid financial security for both mother and child. She requested substantial alimony, full child support, and exclusive use of the penthouse until the baby turned 1. Oliver's brows drew together at that, but he kept quiet, visibly struggling to swallow his urge to jump in and argue. When it was Atticus's turn, he didn't deny Oliver's betrayal but framed it as a single lapse in judgment. He urged Clara to consider reconciliation and proposed a shorter alimony period, more modest child support, and shared custody once the baby was born. The phrase shared custody made Clara's stomach knot. She imagined her baby's crib in 2 different homes, her child shuttled back and forth, too young to understand why. A dull ache flared behind her eyes at the thought of packing a diaper bag, handing her baby over to Oliver, then sitting awake through the night, worrying about everything she couldn't control anymore. The hours crawled by in a tense tug-of-war of offers and counteroffers. Occasionally, Oliver tried to speak to Clara directly, but Andrea cut him off each time, guiding everything back through proper channels. The air in the conference room felt thick enough to choke on, broken only by Daphne's calm nudges urging both sides toward compromise. By late afternoon, they had the fragile outline of a deal. Oliver agreed to a substantial monthly support payment and would allow Clara to keep the penthouse for a year, after which it would be sold and the profit split. In return, he wanted generous visitation and joint legal custody for big decisions about the child's life. Clara's pulse stuttered at the thought of having to share major choices with him again. But deep down, she knew her baby deserved a father, despite everything. She stared across the table at Oliver, searching for the man she'd once trusted without question, and felt only a hollow echo of what used to be love. They left the office drained, no final signatures yet, but the shape of the settlement finally visible. Inside the elevator, Clara leaned against the cool metal wall and exhaled shakily. It felt like she'd run an endless marathon. "This is just the beginning," Andrea reminded her, her voice steady but kind. "But it's progress. He's willing to meet you halfway." Clara nodded and pressed a protective hand over her belly. For the first time, she let herself see a small light at the end of this dark tunnel. Whether Oliver would live up to his promises or find ways to twist them remained to be seen. But she swore, to herself and to her unborn child, that she would never again trade her dignity or her baby's well-being for empty second chances. Over the next month, the negotiations continued, a blur of emails, phone calls, and a few more tense sit-downs in Daphne's office. Each revised draft of the divorce settlement brought them closer to a compromise neither truly liked, but both could accept. Through it all, Oliver clung stubbornly to the hope that the conversations might melt Clara's resolve. He'd slip in heartfelt pleas whenever he thought Andrea was distracted. But each time, Clara reminded him, calm, unflinching, that this was no longer about saving a marriage. This was business, and she was done sacrificing herself to save him. One crisp morning, Clara got a call from Andrea. "We have a date for the final hearing," her attorney said. "1 week from today, we'll go before the judge and lock this in." Clara's chest tightened at the words. Relief rose up. She would soon be free of the limbo of her crumbling marriage. But beneath that freedom bloomed a quiet sadness too. This was never how she pictured building a family. Pregnant, alone, negotiating custody with the man she'd once trusted most. Still, through the ache, she felt steady. She owed it to her baby to build a safer, more honest life. The morning of the hearing arrived cold and drizzly. Clara dressed with care, choosing a fitted black maternity dress that made her feel both dignified and unshakable. Natalie went with her, a steady presence at her side. Outside the courthouse, a grand old building, all stone columns under a gloomy sky, they met Andrea on the steps. Inside, the tension was thick. Oliver sat beside Atticus at the opposing table, his face drawn and somber. A few curious strangers and 2 reporters recognized them and whispered from the benches behind. Clara took her seat, ignoring the flutter in her stomach. Nerves, or maybe just the baby reminding her she wasn't alone. When the judge entered, everyone stood. The hearing began with the routine formalities. Attorneys stating names, confirming details, and laying out the settlement one last time. Clara focused on the judge's measured tone, refusing to glance at Oliver, who she knew was watching her. They read the terms aloud. Alimony, child support, custody arrangements, division of property. When the judge finally asked if both sides accepted, a hush fell over the room. Oliver cleared his throat, shifting slightly. For a heartbeat, Clara's lungs locked, afraid he might back out at the last second. But when he spoke, his voice was subdued. "I agree, Your Honor." The judge turned to Clara. "Miss Whitman, do you concur with these terms?" A tight swirl of heartbreak and relief spun in her chest. She drew in a slow breath. "Yes, Your Honor, I do." With that, the gavel struck the bench, a sharp sound that sealed the end of a once-envied marriage. A phone camera flashed somewhere behind her, catching a moment she wished no one would remember. The judge adjourned, leaving Clara and Oliver standing in a corridor, thick with spectators and reporters. For the first time in forever, Clara let herself look directly at him. In his eyes she saw the same raw hurt she carried inside. But they both knew this was the road they'd made for themselves. His betrayal, her self-preservation. A single tear slipped free before she caught it with the back of her hand. Then she turned away, each step toward the exit a quiet reclaiming of her own life. 1 week later, Clara Whitman's divorce was officially recorded by the court. She woke up in Natalie's guest room on a clear, sunlit morning, breathing in the crisp air. And for the first time in a long while, she felt not just free, but wide open to everything still possible. It felt as if she had finally shed an enormous weight. Yes, she was still pregnant. Yes, life was still full of hurdles. But for the first time in too long, Clara had reclaimed herself. Her name, her choices, her future, no longer shadowed by Oliver's betrayals. She moved quietly around Natalie's apartment, preparing a simple breakfast of toast and fresh orange juice. Natalie had already left for work, but had left behind a sticky note on the table. "You're stronger than you know. Love you." Clara smiled at the small kindness, then settled at the kitchen counter and opened her laptop to check emails. One caught her eye, a message from Andrea confirming the final filing details and attaching the signed judgment of divorce. It was real. Final. Done. Her phone buzzed with a new text from Oliver. "I know the marriage is over, but I'd like to come to the next prenatal appointment. If that's allowed, please tell me when." A knot of mixed feelings tightened in her chest. The settlement granted him the right to attend big pregnancy milestones and, eventually, to co-parent. His words sounded genuine this time. But trust didn't regrow overnight. Clara typed a calm, clear reply. "The appointment is next Thursday at 2 p.m. If you want to be there, show up. I won't stop you." She hit send, then shut her eyes and drew in a slow breath. She wanted her child to have the best parts of both parents, even if that meant letting Oliver try to be a father, under her careful watch. Later, with the city humming outside, she started browsing online listings for apartments closer to her old neighborhood. She had saved enough from the settlement to live comfortably while she mapped out her next career move. Part of her longed for a small place, tucked away on a quiet street in the Marina district, where life felt more human and less ruthless. Another part of her toyed with the thought of going back to her childhood town, where the air felt softer and neighbors looked out for each other. For now, just knowing she had choices felt like freedom enough. That evening, she curled up on the couch with a blanket and a bowl of sliced fruit, flipping through a baby name book. Her finger paused on a few names she whispered out loud. Adeline, Sebastian, Eliana, Jude. Each name carried a spark of hope for a future that belonged to her and her child alone, untouched by old wounds. A quiet gratitude settled over her. Even in heartbreak, she'd found her way back to herself. And to a beginning no one could take away again. Clara's story reminds us, even the most dazzling fairy tales can crumble when betrayal seeps in, but a woman strong enough to walk away can always write a new one. The glittering life Clara once shared with Oliver crumbled beneath the weight of betrayal, forcing her to face heartbreak head-on and navigate a tangle of legal battles. Yet through every crushing setback, Clara unearthed a deep reservoir of strength, one that carried her through protecting her unborn child and reclaiming her own identity. So the story is over, and our wonderful friends, are you still here with me at this hour? If you truly stayed until the very end, then I believe something in Clara's journey must have stirred your own heart too. What did we witness together? Not just betrayal or heartbreak, but the quiet, unyielding courage of a woman who chose herself and her child above the glitter and illusions of a perfect life. Sometimes in our own lives, we cling so tightly to what should be that we ignore what is. We forgive too easily. We hush our instincts. We hope they'll change. Until one day, like Clara, we stand trembling but unbroken, ready to say, enough. There's a line by Haruki Murakami that says, "And once the storm is over, you won't remember how you made it through. But one thing is certain, when you come out of the storm, you won't be the same person who walked in." This is Clara's truth, and maybe yours too. No matter how sharp the betrayal, you can choose dignity. No matter how deep the hurt, you can choose healing. And no matter who failed to love you right, you can learn to love yourself, fiercely, fearlessly, and fully. So tonight, take this story with you. Let it remind you that storms do pass, that your worth is never tied to someone else's broken promises, and that you can always begin again, wiser, braver, and beautifully whole. If Clara's journey touched you, please take a second to like this video, share it with someone who needs a gentle reminder that they are stronger than heartbreak, and subscribe to this channel for more stories that honor the messy, glorious ways we survive and grow. Stay gentle with your heart, dear friends, and until the next story, keep choosing you.